We'll record, and I think we're going, and Bruce, you're up first.
All right, so first I will discuss the status of summer work. We've brought all the student devices in and cleaned them up and relabeled them and reconfigured them, and they're all staged in classrooms and ready to go. And so the student device work is accomplished. The new staff members are what we're working on right now, preparing their devices and getting ready for the new staff orientation day. We also have another team of people finishing up projector installs. We try to rotate our projectors 1/3 of the inventory at a time. And we've got the last projectors installed this week, so that'll get everyone up to snuff on current projectors. We still have another rotation to come, of course, but that's going to be an ongoing scenario anyways. And my team has also gone through every classroom and every office space and every kitchen space and every gathering space and redone our inventory. Twice a year, we go through with barcode readers and check all the inventory that we have deployed and confirm that it's still where we think it is rather than where someone else thinks it should be, and reconcile that list and make sure we're all good there. And other than that, the firewalls have all been put in place and our network has been reconfigured in such a fashion that allows us to make sure that all phone communications have a priority on the network. When we get into a testing environment with NWIA testing and MEAs and things like that, because we have so much concurrent traffic going on at the same time, we've noticed some interference with our phone systems during peak testing seasons. And so we've purchased hardware and configured things in such a way that not only does all phone traffic get a priority, but all phone traffic will leave the building to the internet directly. Whereas for years, our structure has been that Network Maine made all of our internet traffic go to the middle school first. And so we asked for an exception for our phone traffic, and they've honored that exception. And so now all phone traffic goes to the internet directly out of the building without having the extra hop over to the middle school and the bottleneck of which that creates as well. So we're really hoping that the phone system is much better this year and that we don't have the Charlie Brown teacher voices in it anymore. And in terms of priorities, so now as school opens up, of course, our priority is to get students into their devices and get ready for the first round of assessment testing. But we're also in the background starting our preparations for the new office space that we'll be moving to and start getting things ready and identified as what needs to be accomplished to go in that direction. But other than that, that's about as short and sweet as I can get.
Sounds good. Any questions, Brad? Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks, Bruce. It sounds like you're doing a lot of work over the summer. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. My team does quite a bit, and they're very dedicated to it. And we do bring in some temporary help that are other staff members that typically have the summer off, and so they've been very helpful as well.
Bruce, I have a question, probably not related to anything you just said, but I've been in the Verkada app, the security camera app. And one thing I noted in the frames, like if you're looking at high school, for example, you can see all these various parts of the high school. Is there a way to label what you're looking at? In other words, like quarter X
Yes.
or Z or whatever?
Yes, that is on our to-do list of renaming the cameras. We first asked, so the layout, when you first go into the app and that tile figure comes out, we've asked the buildings to tell us what their priority is for those. They want to be able to read them, if you will, have it be a a flowing document, I guess is the best way I can think of it. You know, they want to see the cameras in a specific order because that's how their brain is processing the building from left to right, if you will. And so when we receive that information back from the principals, then we will rename them all and get them organized in a fashion that allows them to read from left to right, if you will.
Got it. Thank you. That answers my question.
Okay. Anything
That-
else?
All right.
I think that's it, Bruce. I know you've got to run.
I'm off to a football game. They changed
right.
the preseason game from an away game to a home game. So
All right. Well, we wish them good luck.
absolutely. Thank you.
All right. See ya.
We'll see ya. Bye.
All right. Well, so for curriculum related priorities.
Just before we get started, Stephanie, did you remind Carol, or does she generally just need a reminder to attend meetings, or how does that work?
Lauren said that he would do that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if Lauren reminded her. I always send out the calendar invite so people can just accept that and it goes automatically to their calendars.
So I guess the first order of business is on behalf of the board. I apologize that the chair of the committee is not here. I think that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, would you like us to continue?
Well, I feel like I'm happy to provide my input and to share any things you'd like to hear from my perspective, but I'm reluctant to go too far into details because my colleagues on the board aren't here. And so I apologize for that. I feel like that shouldn't happen.
Well, I can certainly save my topics. They're not going to change, in terms of what we're working on, especially starting out the school year. I can save that for our meeting in September, if that would be better, and make sure that we've got enough of the board representation.
What if we did this? What if you provided a filter on the topics that you had planned to discuss today and bring up any ones that you feel would be helpful for John and I to hear and to bounce? I mean, I'm only up for attending meetings if they're productive, if they're helpful. I'm not up for doing it pro forma. So if there are certain topics that you feel like would be useful for me to hear or for John and I to hear together and have a discussion that would be helpful with the work that you do, then I'm happy to do it. I guess you're hearing some frustration in my voice because I feel like this is the most important committee that we have on the board. This is what gets to the heart of what we're about. It connects most strongly to the mission of RSU13. And for us not to attend is really disheartening for me. So I'm going to have some conversations with people on the board outside of just one-on-one, which I'm able to do. But I hope that this doesn't reflect on the work that in no way you feel like it's reflecting on the work that you do or the importance of the work in this committee.
Well, I appreciate that. I think the nice thing about our administrative team and our staff is that we have a sharp focus on what we know we need to do.
Mhm.
And I think curriculum wise, I've got a laundry list of things that we're working on. And I know I've shared some of that with the board before. We've got a bookworms pilot coming up. We've got Ready Classroom, new implementation for middle school. We've got some standard revision that I was going to share, but I think maybe something that the board would be interested in hearing about is what's happening with the middle school and the high school in terms of some of the behavior issues that I think we've heard about in the past. I know the board has brought that up often at board meetings, and the board just voted to hire a new assistant principal position at the high school. And we've actually been working all summer on a plan to implement some universal supports in all classrooms for grades 6 through 12. And we met this morning. We've got a team of teachers that are working with administrators now to really think about how can we start the year. We've done an analogy. It's like a dentist visit. you don't just do your 2-year dentist visits and call it good. You brush your teeth every single day. That's how you keep your teeth healthy. So how do we keep our supports for students healthy and ongoing? We can't just do a one and done training. We all know that that's not the most effective. So we want to do our beginning of the year dentist visit, that's the cleaning, but then what are we doing in our classrooms ongoing to keep this level of universal supports for all of our students? And some of our opening workshop day work will be really around that focus of sort of like a pyramid, the initial layer of that pyramid being those universal relationship building supports. What does a restorative classroom look like? Not just restorative circles, but restorative practices that are intertwined within what you're doing in your classroom to build relationships with all of your students. And then we're looking at maybe not the first day with faculty, but administrators are talking about the other piece of that, which is how does our student code of conduct layer onto that? So everybody's establishing relationships with students and having a restorative classroom environment, but there are going to be behavior issues, and we know that. So what does a level 1 response to behavior issues in the classroom look like? We're going to be building out that piece, and we've been having conversations around what are ways that teachers can support some of those behaviors in the classroom and even track some of those behaviors. How do we deal with level 2 and level 3 behaviors if those behaviors continue to increase? And then how can we ensure that we're doing that in a restorative, supportive way for students? So that's been some really exciting work that's been taking place over the summer that I think the board would probably be really interested in hearing, because that topic came up quite a bit last year. And in talking with staff, when we've been discussing it, the staff have asked us to frame it the way that we've started framing it with the staff that we brought into the conversation, which is last year when we started the school year, the stress level was already at an all-time high after week 1. We went into the school year. I think we started August thinking maybe it's going to be better than the previous year. Obviously, we all know that last year was not better than the previous year. It was actually worse. But I think we all had a little bit of hope at the end of August. But then we had the required masks, and as students came back, we immediately saw an increase in behaviors. And by the end of week 1, I think we all recognized that this is going to be a really tough year. People were exhausted by the end of September, when usually you still have like that honeymoon energy from meeting your new students. Nobody had that. So it can be hard to build relationships when teachers are already at that max stress level. So we want to go into this year. I'm very confident that it's going to be a much better year. I heard from Dr. Cheryl Litke, who told me it's going to be a much better year COVID-wise. We worked on our COVID protocols this morning as a team and just finalized everything. They look great. We've got it down to a page and a half, very simple, and nothing major that we have to do. Masking continues to be optional. Quarantine is not required by anybody except for those who are currently testing positive. So I think in that realm, we're going to have more people in school more often at the start of the year as well. And that's going to cause less stress, hopefully.
If I can jump in for 1 second here,
Yeah,
just
go ahead.
because I love what you said at the beginning. I think you weren't at last Thursday's meeting, but I think what you're talking about very much aligns with some of the goals that the board discussed on Thursday. And John or Lauren can share that with you at some other point. I think one thing that would be helpful for me to hear, and I imagine for Lauren as well, is like, how can we on the board support those goals? Like, what can we do? What do you need to do the things that you're hoping to do resource-wise? Or what are some of the things that are obstacles that are getting in your way that we can address as a board that aren't allowing you to complete some of those goals? But in particular, you talked about the student engagement. And I think if you think about student engagement, you think about absenteeism, and you think about behavior issues, they're all sort of interconnected.
Yeah.
If you have kids who are really engaged in learning, they're not going to misbehave and they're going to attend school, right? I mean, it's going to be a really nice cohesion, right? If you have kids who aren't engaged, then I think some of those behavior issues and certainly the absenteeism is going to be much higher. So if we can really align around whatever it takes to make those classes really engaged, to really get those kids excited about learning again. And the other connection to that I'm thinking about is something that John mentioned earlier, which is the parent engagement and partnerships with parents and getting them as active partners in the learning process. Then I think we're really going to, you know, have a much better year all around in the ways that I think you're hoping. But I think as a board, we need to hear from you, like, hey, this is an issue we've identified. How do we address this? Or these are some resources. And you did that to some extent with asking for a second assistant principal. I think that's going to help. But if there are other things that you feel like you need in order to achieve those goals, it would be helpful, at least from my perspective, to hear what they are, and so we can start working toward them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just off the top of my head, and I have shared this in the past, but it might have been before you were on the board, Brad, or very early on. One of the best things that the board can do is, the board doesn't always have to agree, but doing any level of disagreement, so long as it's done in a respectful way, really modeling what we're expecting of our own students, I think is really important. When we get some of that inner fighting or turmoil, which is what we experienced in the way past, and I'm talking, you know, Lauren, you were probably on the board at that time, but those types of things, I think, are perceived by our community in a really negative way, and it sheds a really negative light on our school district. And I think right now we have a lot of really good things going for us. We're rebuilding that momentum that we had right before COVID. We're trying to build that back up. So the more cohesive and supportive that the board can be, the better. And again, that doesn't have to be everybody's always in agreement all the time, because I know that that's not realistic. But I think having conversations in really respectful ways to try to problem solve is what we want to make sure that we're modeling for our students.
How many staff do you guys think watch our board meetings? Like, what? I don't expect a lot of people watching, either from community or staff, but I do want to sort of know, if you know, ballparky, like how many folks are hearing what we do, what we say, and how we conduct ourselves, because you're absolutely right about that.
The one thing I can tell you about that, Lauren, is I think the union president watches our meetings a lot. I think she's dialed into just about every meeting, and the thing is, if she will communicate out with the membership if she thinks there's something that they ought to take note of. I know that has happened in the past, so I'm not sure that, you know, there's a large number of staff that are watching live, but I do know that they're being paid attention to. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, like I don't expect many people to be watching either, but yeah, if something big happens, people do have the opportunity, you know, to tune in and watch it later, which is different than no technology before. So whether it's good or bad, that probably happens, you know, and hopefully we don't have any bad times that people want to tune in and watch. That did happen a long time ago, but at least in terms of, not at least, completely and mostly in terms of how supportive we are of our staff all the time, all the way. I just hope they get that message all the time, because I know Brad and I really focus on that, and we just hope they get the message all the time, how we feel about them and how we support them and want to do our best in our job as board members to support them.
So Lauren, before you joined, Brad was the only board member, so I wasn't sure how far to go into what I had initially planned on sharing, and then any further brainstorming that the group might want to do. I wasn't sure if I might save some of that until Carol is back with us, maybe in September, or if you want me to go further into detail, or if we want to do any additional planning as a group.
I think you can go into as much detail as you want. Not surprisingly, you know, where I come from is everything that we can to expand and strengthen our 3 stated missions of, you know, caring relationships, building proficiencies, and discovering pathways. anything along those lines that the curriculum committee pursues and does and supports of our staff is great with me.
Well, I guess I'm also wondering if the curriculum committee wants a role in any of the projects. I know I give a lot of updates and share a lot of information.
Well,
You know,
another thing to say is that in September, Carol should be back here in the meeting, and Rebecca should be able to join us.
Okay.
And I think Rebecca will offer a lot to what we discuss. So if you don't want to get detailed on what we're going to do for the coming year until September, that's fine, because I think, you know, those two will be involved in that discussion. I don't know, there might be another board member or two that wants to join this committee as well, and I'm fine for folks to join a committee, even if the numbers are lopsided, as long as every committee can do its job. You know, policy is a couple people plus me,
Yeah.
and John will get it done. If curriculum is 6 people, including me, we'll get it done. You know, so think along those lines. There may be a doubling or even more of people joining this curriculum committee, technology committee, Zoom every month.
Well, one suggestion I have, because the projects that we're doing this year, I can read them off to you. They sort of cover everything in terms of relationships, proficiencies, and pathways. So relationship wise, what I was just sharing for middle school, the work that middle school and high school are taking a look at in terms of universal supports for students is one project. And then of course, we're continuing with the second step for K through 5. We just purchased an online component of that so that we can have updated materials for all of our school counselor instructors, but teachers will be able to access those materials as well. So that's sort of the relationship piece. The proficiency piece, we have a Ready Classroom new implementation of the math curriculum for grades 6 through 8. They're training this Thursday, and we'll be using those materials for the first time this year. Ready Classroom for grades K through 5 will be in year 2 of the implementation. We are continuing, we're doing a bookworms pilot for K through 5, which I know I've shared with this group before. We did the trainings this summer, 2 one-week trainings. And then we have a standard revision for health, physical education, art, music, and visual performing arts, like theater, that we have to go through because the state updated their standards. So we need to go through their new updates and just realign our language to make sure that we're covering what's required in the main learning results. So that's in terms of the proficiencies piece. And then the pathways piece, we're continuing our after school programming for K through 5. This is our final year of after school programming through 21st century funding, but we would really like to rewrite the grant and find a way to continue the use of that funding for the coming years. And then we have the high school ELO internships, and we just sent a group to the University of Maine to get trained at the beginning of last week. And there's going to be quite a learning curve, I think, but there's lots of opportunities in terms of different businesses and organizations that have already been reaching out to us based on that Village Soup article from the last board meeting where Steve Betts wrote about our plan for internships. I had at least 5 different businesses reach out and say, who's organizing this? Who can I connect with to make sure that, you know, we can get some interns? So I thought that was really exciting. So that's sort of in terms of the pathway piece. So one thing I could do, because again, there's a lot on this list. If we want to design a way to narrow the focus and the lens of these meetings, I could do, you know, maybe September, we want to really look at how is the year starting with that relationship piece. What do you have for data? What are teachers doing? How did that initial training go for the grade 6-12 teachers? We could look at just the relationship piece. October meeting, we could look at just the pathways piece, because that's when we'll be starting our internships and we'll have all of our after school programming up and running. November, we'll be 3 months into our bookworms pilot and our implementation. We could look at just the proficiency piece. So if that would be helpful and sort of give more of a specific focus so that the group feels like if I share some data and you provide some feedback, it's more of a not just sit and get type of a meeting, but more of a conversation.
I like it. That's great. And it's great to focus on those areas like that. And you could keep doing it throughout the year. You know, this month we're talking about one of those three. Yeah. That's great.
I agree. I would add one more request if it's not too onerous. One of our colleagues on the board asked to see sort of a regular report on some of the progress. I think she was focused mostly on proficiencies, although it could certainly apply to the other two pathways or to other two components as well. And the idea that I think some of us talked about after the last meeting was maybe to have not your reports are amazing, Stephanie, and I love them because they have so much detail. But I think for people who aren't as fluent in curriculum, it's a lot to digest. And I'm wondering if we might be able to highlight 3 to 5 key data points or 3 to 5 key areas where we could see, okay, this is where we are in September. This is where we are 3 months later. This is where we are 3 months later. And have that as part of your report to the board. I think some people on the board would really appreciate that. And Lauren and John, feel free to chime in here as well.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, the idea, if it works for you, Stephanie, could be, in addition to everything else you report, that you report the same 5 things every month. Where the numbers are blank, 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 5 things. Could be attendance, I don't know.
The only
But
issue
that's,
Lauren, the only issue I see with that is that some of these metrics don't change month by month.
yeah,
I mean,
I was thinking quarterly myself, or every
quarterly.
I mean, I think, and I don't, I'm also cognizant that this is a work to put together a report every month for the board. If we can take a little bit off Stephanie's plate,
Right.
maybe do
Right.
every 3 months or every 4, whatever you feel is appropriate. But I think that the motivation behind this request, and I'm speaking for another colleague on the board, is to get a sense of the progress we're making within the district and certain key indicators for performance and certain key indicators for attendance or whatever you feel is going to show, whether we're going forward or whether we're treading water or if we're going backward in some places. It's good for us to know those things. And I don't know how you feel about that. And I would leave it to you and John to determine which of the key indicators to start off with. And then, the board might say, hey, that's great, but we also want to know X, Y, or Z.
Let me just pull up if I can make sure that our website is working, which it sort of was glitchy earlier. So I have always put together an educational report. I think it's a little lengthy. I don't think the board honestly ever looked at the report when I printed it out. I think it probably got brought home and put someplace and never seen. I don't think anybody looks it up on the website, to be honest. So I did not do one this year. But I will share where we have kept these. So this is under the curriculum tab, and we have a section here for assessment data. I didn't even end up, we do have the 2020-2021 report, but I didn't post it because, again, I don't think anybody really uses this data. But here's just a quick example, and this one probably isn't a good one because we didn't have 2020 data. But basically, it was intended to align with all of our major goals. So we had district level data. How are we supporting students? That's the relationship piece. What do academic standard measures show? So our proficiency piece, and then attendance rates and graduation rates that were kept in an ongoing fashion so that you could compare from year to year. And then if you wanted a closer view of each school, we had everything separated by school. Again, this is the district section on social emotional learning, special education supports for students with all of our some of our supported programs like response to intervention, gifted and talented, pre-K, English language learner support, community partners, parent involvement from our conferences, standardized measures. Now MEA is now the NUIA data, so it's really just replacing some of these tables. But I'll also scroll quickly down here so that you can see attendance. This is where we would put the school year, the attendance rate. So this is a table I can easily replicate and do that in an ongoing manner. Of course, we have the rates from when we had multiple buildings across the district. And then I have this teased out separately for each school as well, so that you could see each school's page. Same with graduation and dropout rates. And then each school page follows the same sort of formula, a brief description by the principal, student support, so starting with that relationship piece, and then the proficiency piece. What do the standardized measures show? We had MEA and NUIA data. Again, of course, they're now one and the same. And then average daily attendance that was tracked over time so that you could see comparison from one year to another. And then it goes on to the next school and follows the same formula. I think it was lengthy. So I don't know that that whole report is necessary, but maybe there's little pieces from that the committee would like to go through that report and pick out the pieces that seem to be the most relevant. Because I could talk about all of it, and I'm happy to update all of it. Well, I'm not really happy to update all of it because it takes a long time, but I will do what the board wishes. I'm just not sure exactly what you would like from that. If I'm paring down 5 things, do you want attendance rate for each school, dropout and graduation rate? We only get that once a year, but I can remind the board each time, or I can show the comparison each time. Math and reading NUIA scores with growth data and proficiency data.
If your entire report was always headlined as data around engagement and success, that would be awesome, because we're really being really positive in how we look at that. And yeah, it just can't be too many data sets or numbers, or just people just glaze over, as you well know, right? We all know that. So if it's a bunch of data points that you can access easily over time and report to us easily without too much effort to show rates relative to engagement and success, that would be awesome.
Okay. I think I can probably get the attendance rates, but I probably could do that quarterly. I can work with Joseph on that piece. And then I'll think through NUIA, what would be the easiest and best way to share that. We only give that assessment. It's required 2 times a year, once in the fall, once in the spring. But I think each time I could just, remind the group, we don't have to spend a lot of time there, but anything that has a change, I could share the change. Anything that hasn't changed, it's just a refresher of this is where we are, this is what we're working on.
One of the things that I guess complicates this to an extent is that some of this data, as was just pointed out, comes in once a year, and other parts of the data come in a couple times a year and at different times. So if you think about the course of the school year, I know that Stephanie has reported on this data, but it's not coming all at once. It's coming at different points in the school year. So, I think it might be wise to sort of pick out different times of the year to report, or maybe pick out trends, like pick out the graduation rate and the attendance rate trend and report on that, because that might be something that board members could remember.
Yeah.
Fairly easily, but not, in other words, not to put it all out there at once. Because I don't think there's anybody that could remember even 5, let's say it was just 5 points, right? You're not going to remember those 5 points, but you might remember, hey, last meeting we talked about graduation rate, right? We talked about attendance rate. And we know what's going on with that. And then we can talk about NWEA another meeting. I think, to me, that would be, more helpful than trying to have like repeat updates on points, because some of them don't repeat. We get a graduation rate for the year and that's it, but we have a trend that we can report on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it's got to be, you're right. It's got to be something understandable. It follows a certain almost routine or schedule, and it's basic data around engagement and success.
It's like coming up with talking points for, because
Yeah,
I know that's what board members, because community members ask them, right, about certain
Yeah.
things. And if
Yeah.
they had talking points to that end, I think it might be helpful.
yep.
Yeah, I would leave it to you two to determine the frequency and the scope, but with the underlying sentiment that it shouldn't be too much, like a one pager in essence. And then if there, I guess the other layer to it, if we're seeing trends that are concerning to you, maybe highlight those things so that we can then, as a board, make sure that you have the time and resources to address them adequately.
Yeah,
So-
I think that makes sense. I think since I didn't do the education report this year, I can consolidate what would have gone into it into a quick one pager with 5 points, attendance rates, truancy rates, current graduation rate, NUIA proficiency, and NUIA growth. That's 5 things. It might be a little more than one page because it would be district-wide and then indicated by each school. So that's going to take up a little extra space, but that way people could drill down. The district picture always looks different from the school-based picture because our schools have very different needs. I think that's really important for the community to understand as well. That's why we have different objectives that schools are working toward, because they don't all look the same. The data tells a different story at each school, so the objective needs to really meet what the school's actual needs are based on its population. But
Okay.
I could definitely do that. And at the beginning of each meeting, I could just do a screen share, remind the board where to find the information too, because I'll put it on that same page where I just showed you the education report. They can become talking points. The community can access the information, board members, it will be right at your fingertips. And then it's just that constant reminder that this is where you can go, even if the data doesn't change, because again, we only get NUIA data twice a year. So, but you'll recall the information and then you'll know where to access it in the future. So I can do that.
Okay, that sounds good. Sounds very good. And I just want to be careful that you don't overwork yourself on data if people aren't looking at it. Because as someone who's been not burned, but you learn like what to put out there that people consume and what they don't consume. And just no reason for you to have extra work on your plate if people aren't consuming it. So generally speaking, our web page needs to be inclusive of every sort of like value and programmatic idea and synopsis that we have in our district, but it doesn't have to be up to date on 100 data points all the time because that's too much work and people aren't looking at it. So
yeah, and that is really what I found with that education report, that it wasn't quite worth the time that we were putting into it with all the, tables. I have all the data. And if we're just boiling it down into those 5 points, it's really just a matter of pulling it together and putting it on one sheet. But it will probably not include a bunch of narrative in the way that our current education report is set up. Maybe just some quick one-liners so that people can address questions about the data, and indicate what the trends are showing, but not in depth and in detail about what we're doing in each school. I think we have other ways that we can address that are a lot more effective, like how we had principals come a principal at each board meeting talking about the objective that they're working toward and
Yeah.
what their own data was showing.
yeah. Yep. So in terms of broad-based long-term curriculum goals in the relationships and pathways areas, the relationship area, I think we need to figure out an extremely common language from pre-K to 12. Because Second Step is a great program and the bar model is a great program, and they probably have similar language, but it may not be common. And the reason I say common is that when students get the same messaging and an emphasis every year, it just sinks in so deeply. If programs are talking about the same concepts, but with different languaging, they may get confused and not understand what they're learning from 4th grade to 9th grade. So over time, and I don't mean this year, I mean, whatever time it takes, that common language on what is a caring relationship and how do I do it? And what is emotional understanding and how do I manage my emotions? The same messaging year after year after year that is scientifically based, clinically sound and great for schools. I'm hoping that we can achieve over time. When it comes to pathways, what I'm hoping, but it's not my job to say that it's true or not, but what I'm hoping is every student graduates or ends freshman year having entered a pathway that they may not know what it is. Maybe the generalist pathway like we've talked about, but the experience of school as being, I'm here to learn about what I love doing and what I can do and what's out there and what's available. And my pathway is just as special as any other pathway. I'm therefore just as great as any other kid. There's no like, I'm less than or I'm more than based on what I want to do in life. So that's another long-term goal I have as a board member, to help you guys figure that out if it works. Again, it's not my job. I don't know. I think it'll work, but I don't know. I come from a mental health perspective all the time. It's what I do, whether it's helpful or not. I hope it's helpful. But when students, like any adult, feels like, I really belong here and what I do matters and what I think matters and what I want to do with my life is great, just like every other kid, I think that's wonderful. And I think it's achievable in our high school. We're well on our way. I don't know what other high schools are doing it like we are, and I don't really care. It's up to them. But I just think that the strength of kids knowing that their pathway is just as awesome as any other one is super. It's great.
And that we're helping them figure it out, because I
Oh,
think
yeah.
there's an assumption that starts really young. I interviewed my own kids for a project that I was doing. I asked them, what do you think, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's sort of, like the same generic things, like, I want to be a vet, I want to be a teacher, because they don't really know what else is out there. They use their own sort of schema that they've developed around their life about what's out there. They don't know that they could be an astrophysicist or, that they could bake bread for a living or work at Borealis Bread. They don't know everything. So they're sort of limited to their own little experiences. And then when I ask them, what do you think schools are going to do to help you figure out what you want to do and get experience? They really thought that that's the school's main job, that they're going to have all these different experiences so that they can figure out what they're good at, and the school's going to tell them what they're good at. And I don't think that was any of our experiences. It wasn't mine when I went through high school. I think it was my assumption. But you sort of go through this required curriculum. And I was talking with Rebecca. I'm glad she'll be joining this group, but that was one of our conversations as well, that, you end up getting a sort of a required curriculum that requires everything, and you don't really get a sense of what you might be good at because you're doing everything, but not really focusing specifically on anything. So I think it's important that we're looking more at this idea of pathways and how can we be creative and not lose kids through the cracks of just trying to deliver this required curriculum.
Yeah, one of the main things we look at with NEASC accreditation is student agency. And that to me is giving students some voice and choice in terms of some of the things that they learn. I know that that's a lot more work sometimes with teachers if they're trying to deal with 20 different students and they're all going in different directions. It can be really challenging.
Yeah.
But there are some really interesting pedagogical models out there that allow for greater agency. And, you know, at some point, if we wanted to talk about that as a curriculum committee or talk about ways that some of the teachers are now implementing that, or find ways that teachers can learn from each other, the ones who are being really successful in promoting student agency, that could be a really great conversation or a great professional development opportunity for our teachers, because again, that you're going to see a direct correlation between the agency that students feel and their engagement. And of course, if we have the greater engagement, some of these other issues resolve themselves. So I think that would be a wonderful thing to focus in on in terms of some of the professional development or training that you're doing with your teachers this year.
Yeah, and I think that that also dovetails, probably not for this year, but definitely for next year, is thinking about circling back to our graduation requirements. So as we begin experimenting with internships for students, and thinking about these pathway pieces, we're going to want to start thinking about our graduation requirements and what we might want to adjust in that document. We haven't revisited that in a long time. We actually had plans to revisit that right before COVID. I don't think the timing is right to bring it back up at the beginning of this year because everybody's really got a lot on their plates, but I think it would be really appropriate as we begin experimenting with some of these internships for students, and get in alignment with our middle school and high school grading practices, which is another thing that's sort of on the to-do list as we're getting caught back up after COVID. That was another thing that was intended to be wrapped up by the 2020-2021 school year and still hasn't happened yet. I think it would be a good thing to take a really close look at the graduation policy, and it probably should start in this group before it goes to the policy committee.
Stephanie and John, what do you think is like the right sort of age, timing, grade level when we as a school district can ask kids questions like, you know, what do you love doing? And they would have an answer that would relate to a pathway they could start thinking about.
I don't know, it changes so much depending on what they're exposed to. I think
Right.
our most important job is to expose them to as much as we can in terms of learning experiences and, you know, different businesses and organizations within our own community so they can start getting an idea of what's really out there, what might be a good fit for me. And it's not that I want to limit them just to our community, but I think historically, many of our students tend to stay in this area. So I want to make sure that they
Right.
understand if they're going to be a future community member, what are the job possibilities that might interest them?
I guess one thought that I would have, Lauren, is, and that is, I think there are almost as many different answers to that question as there are students in the district, because they're all different. And I think some kids sort of know relatively early on what they're interested in, and they really sort of stick to that. But others tend to go back and forth depending on how successful they are at the time. For some of our students, I know that they can't really state that and might not even be able to state it until they, you know, go on to the next thing after high school, whether it's college or, you know, the workforce or some other thing. But yeah, I think it's always good to ask that question and try to find a way for them to engage in wherever they're at kind of along that journey. That's one of the reasons I think that we've got work to do at the middle school in terms of finding an identity that could allow for more exploration. You know,
Yeah.
I really do. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity for expanding that at the middle level. And I'm very excited about the opportunities that are going to be happening at the high school to get kids outside and hooked up with local businesses and local entrepreneurs. I just think we've got all kinds of potential to develop ways to keep asking that question. I think middle level is a really good spot to at least in earnest start to ask that question.
Yeah, and that's really the answer to the question I had, which is, when do we start that in earnest? Because at a certain age, students can start knowing what we talk about pathway, which to other people may mean career, or people may mean job, may mean this or that. But, and you're right, John, like if we have 1,600 students, we have 1,600 versions of pathway and what that means and what that's going to be and stuff. But I'm not as aware of like, when's the best time to get more serious in describing what pathway means to students and what they want to be thinking about. And of course, we'll expose them to more and more, but I don't know if that's 6th grade or 8th grade. I mean, it's probably in middle school, like you were just saying.
Yeah, but it changes too, Lauren. I mean, kids at a certain developmental age, let's say middle school, might be really, really interested in science, right? But
No, I know it's going to change.
But as they mature, they might find that they're even more interested in the arts or literature or something like that.
Right. So when we talk about it more and more seriously, it's in general pathway. What do you love doing? What do you love doing? What really turns you on? What part of school? What part of this? What part of that? Because absolutely it can and probably will change in a person's lifetime. It's probably kind of rare now when people do the same thing all the time. I don't know. But anyway, that's what's just interesting to me as to how we as a district, how we communicate that and message that and open minds. It's, something I don't know. There's someone at the door. Go ahead. I think it's just a cat.
All right. So anything else? I did add to the notes that next time when we meet in September, we'll have sort of the initial focus beyond the relationships piece, and I'll do my best to have data together by that point. I think I probably can without any issues, but if not, I'll definitely start that process in October.
One thing I want to make sure that the three of you know is that when I talk about a common language for caring relationships, the reason we don't have anything to pick up and utilize because it doesn't exist. In the field of mental health, I mean, we can tell you about, diagnostically, this is anxiety or something. No one's saying diagnostically, this is a caring relationship or not, or it's concerning. But just so you know, when I bring it up, don't think like we just suddenly have an answer, because it just doesn't exist yet. We have to figure it out as a school district and work on it over time. The last thing is the CTE pathway. Is that something that will happen this year, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Yes, that will start this year.
And you and I had a brief conversation somewhere. We're at a table together, and I asked you about, the honors thing, honors brunch. Are we going to rename our current academies as pathways? I think you said yes, and I wholeheartedly support that. The STEM pathway, liberal arts pathway, CET pathway, whatever we call them, they're all equal standing pathways for our students to choose and pursue.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'll have that conversation with Jesse.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
Not from me.
Maybe in the next meeting, we just frame this, but also if there's any other members of the board who are at that meeting, they have an opportunity to just weigh in on any other goals that we have for the year for this committee.
Sure.
So we're providing some agency for the other board members too. It's not just Lauren and me, but they also have voice a little bit in terms of the direction we try to go together.
Sounds good. And new committees, Lauren, when are those established? Are you doing that at the next board meeting?
No, I'm going to wait till after the election in November.
Oh, okay. Oh,
It
gotcha.
only makes sense just to wait.
So is it possible that this group is going to start with one set of people and then change during the school year?
You know, I don't think so with curriculum. I mean, there's one election that happens a week from today, which may make a difference. There's then the election of 3 people in November. But I'm thinking September that the committee can be what it's going to be, but I still don't know yet. But we'll know, you know, coming up. Another thing I want to say just before we finish up, and I tell you guys all the time, is that I don't have concerns about proficiencies. I think the 2 of you get it 100%. I think our principals, our buildings, our staff get it in terms of proficiency. So I talk a lot about relationships and pathways because it's kind of my thing, but also because I think you guys got it going on. Like, I just don't look at anything. And Brad, you've got more experience as a teacher and principal and everything else, and you may see more things than I do. But I just wanted to say that I feel great about all the stuff you're doing, bringing people together and programs together, like you talked about, Stephanie, the things being trained right now, and it's just great. It's just great.
Yeah, I think the key, like you said, Lauren, with the relationship piece, the curriculum is common language. We all know what we mean by what we're saying and what we're expecting, including the students, including families. I think that that's probably one of the biggest hurdles, and we have made a lot of improvements in that area. But as the state likes to do, they're constantly changing things. So we have to continue to change our language to realign with expectations, only where it makes sense. If our language is close enough to the main learning results, we're not making changes to it. But we did just update some of our social studies language because that was in need of an update. We had most of the language ready to go prior to COVID, but I didn't want to make that change to teachers without really making sure that they were ready. And we were all in agreement that we would make the change this summer to the language. So the new social studies language will be implemented this coming school year.
The other thing about relationships too, and I'll stop talking here in a second, but it's not our job as a school board or a curriculum committee to talk about staff relationships. That's entirely yours. And John, I just put it right at your feet, you know, that as much as we as a school district want to focus on relationships for the benefit of students, we also want to focus on that for the benefit of staff and their support of each other, caring about each other, all that stuff. It's not only great for them as people, but it's also great modeling for students. So, but that's entirely yours, John, as superintendent. That's your job. And however you want to work with Stephanie and principals and everyone else to make sure that people in buildings and in programs are doing as much as they can to have great relationships together. That's you, whatever you figure out's best. But I know it's a key part of what students ultimately get in their classrooms.
Well,
John, did you-
I think it's one of those areas that people are very tempted to jump into, but they need to remember that the relationship with the board and the superintendent is what they should focus on. And let me worry about the rest of it.
That's right. Yep.
So, no point taken, I guess.
John, did you share with Lauren and Brad yet the acronym for RSU, or are we waiting for a different time to share?
Well, I hadn't, but let me just say that we're working on something that I think you'll like.
Okay.
And that'll be a teaser for the future. So
That's a teaser.
we're always thinking, and we're trying to think how we push this agenda out there and put it on the tip of everybody's tongue.
Good.
So we'll come back to you when we get a little more firmed up.
Good. Very good.
Maybe by next month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think that's it then. I did take some notes on our agenda to put down our steps for the next meeting. And I'll get Carol caught up on these pieces as well at the next board meeting. And I think other than that, we're good to go.
Can we talk about one item after we turn off the recording after this committee meeting is done?
Yes.
Is that all right?
Yep. Let me just close the recording.